the way from Kansas. Experienced cook needed at McGraw Ranch. Fair wages. Inquire at Coleman's General Store. She took a steadying breath. This was her chance. A new beginning, or at least a place to belong again. But as she walked down the dusty road, she felt the weight of curious stares. Whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. "That's the Carter widow," someone murmured, "come all the way from Kansas. No family, no prospects." "What kind of woman travels alone to work for strange men?" another added. Abigail kept her chin high. She had learned that dignity was sometimes all a woman had left when the world took everything else. The bell above the general store door jingled as she entered. Behind the counter, a heavy-set man looked up from his ledger. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, squinting at her through wire spectacles. "Mr. Coleman," Abigail said politely. "I'm here about the position at the McGraw Ranch." Before he could answer, rough laughter erupted from the corner. 3 cowboys lounged against barrels of molasses, whiskey on their breath even at that early hour. The tallest, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, pushed himself upright. "Well, well," he drawled. "Another pretty thing looking to warm Sam McGraw's bed." His companions snickered. "Ain't much respectable about a woman living alone with a bunch of men." Abigail's face burned, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm seeking employment, sir." Nothing more. The scarred man took a step forward, spurs jangling. "Unless you're planning to cook more than beans and biscuits, if you catch my meaning." "That's enough, Thornton." The voice cut through the room like a whip crack. Every man turned toward the doorway, where a tall figure stood framed against the sunlight. Broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, his hat low over eyes the color of steel. Samuel McGraw. The man's presence filled the space without effort. He walked in slow, controlled steps, every movement deliberate, every glance measured. "Seems I came at the right time," he said quietly. "You boys got business here, or just practicing bad manners?" The cowboys shifted uneasily. Thornton's scarred jaw tightened. "Just havin' some fun, McGraw. No harm meant." "Funny," Samuel said, his hand resting casually near his holstered Colt. "How your fun always seems to bother decent folk. Maybe you'd find better entertainment at the Double Eagle." That was enough. The men muttered under their breath and filed out, boots thudding against the floorboards. When they were gone, Samuel turned to Abigail. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim, "I apologize for that foolishness. Redemption Flats isn't always kind to newcomers." "I can handle myself, Mr. McGraw," Abigail replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But I appreciate your help." For a heartbeat, his gray eyes softened. "You're here about the cook position?" "I am, Abigail Carter." She extended her hand. The gesture startled him slightly, but he took it, his grip firm yet careful. "The job's still open," he said. "Can you cook for 20 hungry cowboys who'd eat their boots if you seasoned them right?" "I ran a boarding house kitchen in Topeka for 3 years," she said. "I can make tough meat tender and stretch flour farther than most believe possible." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "That's good enough for me." "When would you need me to start?" she asked. "Can you be ready in an hour?" Quote, "Yes, sir." He studied her a moment longer, his expression unreadable. "It's not an easy life. The ranch is 15 miles north, isolated. You'll be the only woman there. Works hard, starts before dawn, ends after dark. Wages are $30 a month, plus board." "That's fair," she said simply. He nodded once. "Be at my wagon behind the store when you're ready. We'll ride before sunset." As she turned to leave, she caught sight of Mrs. Prudence Whitfield and her friend Harriet Morse watching from near the fabric counter, their faces tight with disapproval. "A widow woman going off alone with that man," Mrs. Whitfield hissed. "It's scandalous." Abigail ignored them and stepped into the sun. 1 hour later, she was seated beside Samuel on the wagon bench, her carpet bag tucked between sacks of flour and coffee. The horses strained against the harness as they rolled out of town, leaving Redemption Flats, and its gossip, behind. The sun dipped toward the horizon, bathing the land in shades of amber and rose. Samuel's hands on the reins were steady, his silence companionable. "Those women back there," he said finally, his tone thoughtful, Their talk doesn't bother you? Abigail smiled faintly. Mr. McGraw, people have been talking about me since the day I became a widow. Their words are like the wind. They blow hard, but they don't stay. He chuckled quietly. You've got grit, Mrs. Carter. That'll serve you well where we're going. As the wagon rolled north into the fading light, Abigail looked out over the endless prairie. For the first time in months, the ache of loss inside her chest began to ease. Ahead lay a ranch that needed her hands, and perhaps, though she didn't yet know it, a man whose lonely heart needed something far more. The wagon reached the Triple M Ranch just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky streaked in crimson and gold. Abigail had never seen land so vast. The fences stretched for miles, broken only by the silhouettes of cattle grazing in the dim light. The main house stood sturdy and square against the horizon, its porch lamps glowing like beacons in the dusk. Samuel guided the horses into the yard with practiced ease, calling out for his men. They came from the bunkhouse, dusty, tired, and curious about the newcomer. "Boys," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "This is Mrs. Carter, our new cook. You'll treat her with respect. Anyone who forgets that will find himself looking for work elsewhere." A murmur of greetings followed, rough voices softened with genuine curiosity. One older man with white whiskers stepped forward. "Josiah Winters, ma'am. Foreman here. You don't know what a relief it is seeing you. Old Cookie left us 2 weeks ago, and we've been living on beans and bad coffee since." "I'll do my best to improve your situation, Mr. Winters," Abigail replied with a small smile. Samuel led her through the back door into a large, dusty kitchen. The room smelled faintly of burnt grease, and the big cast-iron stove looked as though it hadn't been cleaned since spring. "Your quarters are through there," he said, opening a small door that revealed a modest room with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the mountains. "It locks from the inside. You'll be safe here. The work starts early. Breakfast by 5, dinner at noon, supper at sundown. I'll see that you get supplies." Abigail turned to him. "I understand, Mr. McGraw." He hesitated in the doorway, his hand resting lightly on the frame. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "you're here as our cook. Nothing more. Any man who forgets that will regret it." She met his eyes evenly. "I appreciate your honesty, sir, and you have my word. I'm here for work, nothing else." He nodded once and left, the door closing softly behind him. That night, long after the house went still, Abigail lit a lamp and began scrubbing. The stove shone black and clean by midnight, the shelves were organized, and her hands ached pleasantly from the labor. For the first time in months, she felt useful again. Before dawn, she was awake, lighting the stove and kneading biscuit dough, while the coffee pot hissed and bubbled. When the first cowboys filed in, blinking sleep from their eyes, the smell of bacon and coffee greeted them like a miracle. They ate in silence at first, then laughter and talk filled the room. "Ma'am," said a young hand named Billy Thompson, "these are the best biscuits I've had since I left Missouri." "That's because you left Missouri when you were 12, teased another cowboy, Red Hawkins. "Your ma couldn't boil water without burning it." Abigail laughed softly as she served them all, then turned as Samuel entered. His hair was damp from washing, his shirt crisp and clean. He surveyed the room, the food, the cheerful men, the woman moving with quiet grace between table and stove. "Seems you've improved morale already, Mrs. Carter." "I aim to earn my pay, Mr. McGraw." Days turned to weeks, and Abigail settled into her rhythm. Up before sunrise, feeding 20 men, washing, baking, mending. The work was endless, but it filled the hollowness in her heart. The men respected her, partly because of Samuel's warning, partly because she carried herself like someone who expected decency and got it. Sometimes she caught Samuel watching her in the evenings, his expression unreadable. Once, she found fresh desert roses on the kitchen windowsill, a quiet gesture with no name attached. She didn't need one. Then came the day everything changed. It was a hot, cloudless afternoon when she heard shouting from the corral. Dropping her dish towel, she ran outside. A young cowboy, Tommy Rodriguez, barely 18, lay motionless in the dust while a wild-eyed Mustang circled nearby, snorting and kicking. "Back, ma'am!" Josiah shouted, but Abigail ignored him. She grabbed a bucket of oats and walked forward slowly, speaking low and steady. "Easy, boy. Easy now." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. "You're just scared, that's all." Step by step, she edged closer until she could grab the dangling rope. The men looked on, stunned. Within seconds, she had the animal calmed and tethered. "Get him inside," she ordered, kneeling beside Tommy. Blood streamed from a gash on his head. "He's alive. Bring water and my sewing kit. We'll manage without the doctor." When Samuel arrived from the far pasture, he found her bent over the boy, stitching the wound with practiced hands. Her voice was calm, her movements sure. "Concussion," she said without looking up. "He'll live." Later, when Tommy was resting in the bunkhouse, Samuel stood beside her in the kitchen. "That was quick thinking," he said quietly. "And brave." "Maybe foolish," she admitted, "but it worked." He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "You continue to surprise me, Mrs. Carter." "Because I can cook and handle horses?" He gave a faint smile. "Because you face whatever comes without flinching. That's rare." She looked down into her cup, feeling warmth rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. "We all do what we must, Mr. McGraw." That night, the ranch was alive with laughter again. Tommy was sitting up, bragging about how Mrs. Carter had faced down the wild horse. Even the roughest cowboys spoke her name with respect now. Later, as she stepped outside for air, she found Samuel standing on the porch, the moonlight silvering his features. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind," she said softly. He nodded. "Same here." His eyes stayed on the horizon. "My wife used to stand here. Said the stars were God's promises that tomorrow would come." Abigail's breath caught. It was the first time he'd spoken of his wife. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded, jaw tightening. 6 years now. Scarlet fever took her and our little girl. After that, the ranch was all I had left. Quote. She understood that pain all too well. "Maybe holding on to it isn't about bringing them back," she said gently. "Maybe it's about honoring what you built together." He turned then, eyes meeting hers. Cookie never understood that. "Well," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter, "I'm not Cookie." A faint smile touched his lips. "No, you're not." For a long time they stood together, two souls scarred by loss, finding unexpected peace in shared silence beneath the endless western sky. Inside, the lamp burned low, and the smell of baked bread lingered in the air. For the first time, Samuel McGraw realized the house no longer felt empty. And Abigail Carter, widow, cook, survivor, felt something stir within her heart she thought had died with her husband. Whatever it was dangerous. And beautiful. Dawn came with gun smoke on the horizon. Abigail stood at the porch railing, watching Samuel saddle his horse. The morning air was sharp, carrying the scent of dust and tension. Word had come before sunrise. Morrison's men had cut the Triple M's fences along Cooper's Creek and scattered 100 head of cattle. For most ranchers, that was a headache. For Samuel McGraw, already deep in debt to the bank, it could mean ruin. He swung up into the saddle, his gray eyes grim. "Keep the doors barred. Red and Josiah'll stay behind to guard the house." "Be careful," Abigail said. He nodded once and rode off with a dozen cowboys, their silhouettes disappearing into the haze. All morning, Abigail worked to steady her nerves. Baking bread, feeding the hands who remained, mending shirts she couldn't see for the blur of a worry. Around noon, she heard hooves again. Relief surged until she saw who it was. Clayton Morrison. He dismounted slowly, immaculate as ever, a mocking smile under his mustache. "Mrs. Carter," he drawled, stepping onto the porch, "I was hoping to find you alone." "You should turn around, Mr. Morrison. You're not welcome here." He ignored her. "You could save yourself a great deal of trouble. Leave McGraw before his debts swallow him whole. Come work for me instead. I'd pay double." His gaze dropped insolently, "and I treat a lady's talents with appreciation." Abigail's hand clenched around the rifle, leaning by the door. "I'm sure you do. Now, get off this property." Morrison chuckled low. A woman like you, all fire and pride, it's a shame to waste that on a lost cause." Before Abigail could speak, a familiar voice came from behind her. "Funny," Samuel said, walking from the barn. "I was thinking the same thing about you." Quote. Morrison's smirk faltered. Samuel's shirt was torn, his knuckles bruised, but his voice was steady. "You come here again, Morrison, and you won't leave upright." The rival rancher paled slightly, then tipped his hat with false politeness. "You'll regret this, McGraw. The valley's small, and debts have long memories." When he was gone, Abigail turned to Samuel. "You shouldn't be out of bed. You're bleeding." He shrugged. "It's nothing. It's something," she said firmly, grabbing a basin of water and a clean cloth. "Sit." He obeyed without argument, and for several moments the only sound was her gentle dabbing at the scrape along his jaw. When she looked up, their faces were close, his breath mingling with hers. "Abigail," he said quietly, "when you came here, I thought I was hiring a cook. Instead, you've gone and taken over my house, my men, and what's left of my common sense." Her pulse fluttered. "Are you complaining?" "Not even a little." He leaned forward, his lips brushing hers, hesitant, searching, like a man who'd forgotten what tenderness felt like. Abigail trembled, then kissed him back. It wasn't the desperate hunger of loneliness, it was the slow recognition of something real. When they parted, both were breathless. She stepped back first. "We'll have more trouble from Morrison." "I know." "Then we face it together." He smiled faintly. Together. That evening, the first storm clouds gathered. By nightfall, thunder rolled across the valley and rain came in blinding sheets. As lightning flashed, riders appeared at the gate. Townsmen whipped into frenzy by Morrison's lies. "They're comin'," Josiah shouted. 40 men, maybe more." Samuel moved to the door. Abigail grabbed his arm. "Don't fight them, let me speak." He looked at her in disbelief. "You'll walk into a mob?" "I've been judged before. I survived." "Let me do this." Minutes later, Abigail stood on the porch as lightning split the sky, her skirts plastered to her legs. The men halted, startled by the sight of one small woman facing them down. "If you've come for blood, you'll have to spill mine first," she shouted. "But know this. I've harmed no one. I came here to cook, to earn an honest wage. If that offends your sense of decency, then perhaps it's your decency that needs questioning." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone yelled, "Morrison said." "Morrison lies." Samuel cut in, stepping beside her. "He's been trying to take my land for years. He'll use any lie to do it." Thunder cracked again, shaking the ground. Sheriff Daniels rode up, rain dripping from his hat. "That's enough," he barked. "This meeting's done. Anyone fires a shot answers to me." Slowly, grudgingly, the crowd dispersed. Morrison's men were nowhere to be seen. When the yard was finally empty, Abigail sagged against the doorframe, shaking. Samuel caught her, wrapping his arms around her. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," he murmured. She looked up at him, tears mixing with rain. "I was terrified." "So was I." They stood there until the storm began to ease, the worst of it spent. By morning, the valley smelled of wet earth and renewal. Morrison's men had vanished, their courage washed away with the rain. The sheriff's investigation cleared Samuel's name, and the town, ashamed of how close it had come to madness, quietly made amends. 2 weeks later, Samuel found Abigail at the kitchen table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You could leave now," he said softly. "No one would blame you." She looked up, eyes steady. "Why would I leave home?" Quote. He crossed the room and went to one knee beside her. "Then stay as more than the cook. Stay as my wife." Her breath caught. "Samuel, I can't promise easy days or quiet nights, but I can promise you a heart that won't wander and a place that'll always be yours." She smiled through tears. "Then you have your answer." The wedding was small, held under the cottonwood tree behind the house. The Cowboys stood like proud brothers, Josiah beaming as best man. Abigail wore a simple white dress borrowed from Mrs. Mason in town, and Samuel had never looked prouder. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cheers rang across the valley. The ranch hands fired pistols into the sky, laughing. As evening fell, the couple stood on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The world around them glowed gold and quiet. "The ranch needed your hands to cook," Samuel said, his arm around her waist, "but it was my heart that needed you most." Abigail rested her head against